Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SimAlliance's webinar presenting 2016 Sim shipments. The PowerPoint that will be presented today by Stefan Frank, one of SimAlliance's board members. Before we get started, I should remind you that the content of the presentation that you're about to see is based on data collated from the SimAlliance membership. Now I'll pass you over to Stefan, who will start the presentation. Over to you, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Leanne, and warm welcome also from my side. The SimAlliance figures are generally extremely reliable. So the numbers that you will see represent roughly 90% of the market, and so our members conclude roughly the biggest SIM providers that act globally. And so we have a mixture of numbers that are extrapolated TAM numbers, total addressable or available market numbers, and we have the pure SimAlliance members numbers, and I will work out on this in a few minutes in more dedication. Secondly, basis for the numbers is a blind process that we run via a neutral lawyer to be in line with the antitrust regulations, and we have therefore no chance to see any dedicated sources from the respective data, meaning the vendors respectively, the products respectively, or anything else. So what you see is aggregate numbers. To a certain extent we can see product types and variants, but there's a certain limitation that is owed to the antitrust regulation. More detailed numbers still in line with the antitrust regulations can be shown to our members that are paying our membership fee when you get into contact with the SimAlliance and you pay this membership fee. You get on a quarterly basis a fairly dedicated insight into a worldwide SIM shipment numbers that then also relate to the 90% of global market share. So that's just roughly the introduction to the data backgrounds that you need to know. And with this, I would like to guide you through the first page of numbers. What you see here is the development of SIM shipments, which is, as a matter of fact, EUICC or UICC shipments since 2012. And you see the very positive news is that with the exception of the year 2013, the numbers have developed fairly positively. So I think we are one of the very little industries that can say that even having reached an extremely high level of SIM shipment or of penetration of the theoretical customer base. Remember that the 5.45 billion SIM pieces are in relation to a population of 7.5 billion people on the planet, an extremely high number. And you see that this has been more or less shipped in this fairly ballpark amount of 4.5 to 5.5 billion pieces throughout the last 3 to 4 years. So it's a tremendous performance that the industry is giving here. And even now we have reached an all-time high. So on the basis of 2015, that has been already fairly high with 4.7 billion for the SimAlliance members, up to 4.9 now, and 5.3 to 5.45 billion for the extrapolated TAM. We have increased shipments on the SimAlliance side by 5% and in total numbers by 2.8%. And this is really, I think, an extreme good success story and making us fairly proud and happy. Just giving you some indication on the reason why you see here a certain increase for the positive of the SimAlliance members. That comes, I'm talking about this 5% compared to the 2.8%, that comes mainly due to that we observe with increasing complexity or move to Java card worlds, for example, move to higher complexity products, that this is for the good of Similines members that are, as said, very often and mostly globally active. And they can then, if they enter markets like, for example, India, which is one of the most prominent markets that has moved recently to Java, profit from their experience and know-how of their global shipments in other markets. That's just the first intro on this overall picture, and we will come to some more details on a regional level in some minutes. Just on the next slide, I want to work out before going there on a fairly interesting topic that we have seen on a lot of conferences and discussions and panel discussions and last thing, and I thought it might be of interest for you. As said, shipments are at an all-time high, and we have received a lot of questions in the last years already if we expect a downturn there. And I think it's a fair question. And as said, if you see how many SIMs are shipped since years, every year, it's enormous. On the other side, I want to highlight with this slide that the increasing connectivity, and you might have read already a lot in the last 10 years now about the connected society, about the IoT, about M2M, and about the things that are connected to everything. I think it's just the beginning. So we might have reached a certain maturity degree when it's about smartphone penetration, when it's about the feature phone penetration. But when you talk about connecting things, not only on a fixed net basis, but also cellular basis, if it's automotive, if it's remote surgery, if it's industry 4.0. So you see that there's a lot of, by far not theoretical cases, but really practical cases. It's just the beginning of an extremely fascinating and extremely, I think, inspiring journey. And the important part that I really want to highlight here is that independent of what the form factor is that might be required to serve the respective use cases, the SIM industry, together with the MNOs and the MVNOs as our partners, are able to provide an extremely well-established competence in terms of secure operating system, in terms of the process landscape you need to distribute the profile and data know-how and use data, and then at the end also to manage the life cycle of the respective devices. And if you compare today the requirements that might come up in the next 2-3 years, just imagine 5G, just imagine 25 billion devices connected that was set by Ericsson Mobility Report very recently in 2025. There needs to be something that can be used right away. And I think the MNOs together with the SIM industry are currently having extremely good assets here that can be leveraged within the next years to continue on this fairly successful growth path. So just to elaborate a little bit on this, because I think that's a very important aspect to value and estimate the data. And with this, next slide, please. As promised, we want to offer you a breakdown of the overall numbers, and let me highlight here that this split of numbers is even going beyond what you will receive in the press release, especially with regards to the split of Americas. Between North America, we see a slight contraction, which is, I think, in a fairly little number. On the other side, it's even overcompensated by the South American part, which is having good traction, and we will see in a further slides also how this is split up in a little bit better granularity. Europe on a fairly good level with high smartphone penetration, also contracting slightly, And as a last contraction, the country Middle East, Africa. Well, there's a lot of political irritations these days, and we will have a more dedicated look in sex. But the really positive story is, I think, CIS is back despite the still politically and economically challenging situation. Is back with plus 10%, and this is really good. This is really great news and encouraging news, because I think if political environment improves, this market has even more potential. And then the biggest winner of all is definitely Asia. So you see the tremendous growth number here of 14%, 14% within 2016, which is giving us a lot of inspiration, a lot of positive ideas also for the coming quarters. So that's the overall. Over just maybe one hint, if you see this 2.53 billion, and you remember the overall number that you see also at the top of the chart of 4.9 billion. And let me make one comment. These numbers that you see below are just Similines numbers, so different from the total available market, which we wouldn't have in this granularity. This is definitely only Similines numbers. You see that only Asia is making up for more than 50% of the global market. And with this, I think it makes sense to look further to the regional breakdown. Next slide, please. We start with the big winning region in Asia, plus 14%. And we see here as first country with absolute fascinating dynamics, India, with an increase of more than 17% to 930 million. And let me add here that 960 million is by far one of the biggest volumes of a country globally. So this is really the leading market, and one of the reasons is definitely that a new MNO has started and has filled the channels within 2016. But the other reason is definitely that India has moved also to higher value cards and more complex cards. Not only due to the LTE situation, but also due to additional services and function requirements. So this is really a very good thing, and some of you might remember that since 2012, India has had a massive drop because regulation has led to the fact that selling was massively impacted. I think we lost roughly 30 to 50% partly, depending on the region in India. But now we are more or less back to where we have been, and even better in 2012, which is an extremely positive signal. Indonesia, also incredible 62% increase, which is excellent. And this also, by the way, happening due to modernization of networks. So you see there that cards getting to the market that are LTE capable, and that might also have led to an improved market share of the Alliance members, because the shipments of the Alliance members have increased significantly in this region. China, definitely one of the problems child still, but doing well, doing better. Again, stabilization is coming. And you see this with this 401 million units for the LTE market. It's an extremely positive number. And I can tell you that this is also making up for the majority of cards that have been shipped in this country. And if you compare it to India, I think there is good reason to hope that despite of the regulation, we will see this market coming back to the same dynamics again as have been there before the regulation times. So I think there's good reason to be positive on this one. Pacific Asia, I would see something special to report. Definite solid growth more or less driven by a multitude of factors that are heavily dependent on the respective countries that make up for this region. And fairly same applies for Japan and Korea. Technically progressive as always, definitely. So these are markets that will also in future, I think, make up for always having the greatest and latest technologies. But at this stage, a very reliable and stable market situation there. And that's it for Asia. Let's go to CIS. As mentioned before, we see a 10% growth overall in the region, which is, I think, to me, I was very surprised to see it in the overall numbers. Because I would have expected that the economical and political uncertainty still mean more load and more negative impact to the numbers. But obviously there is the kept back demand is now coming up still, and this market might have even more potential in the next quarters to come. And you see that the Russia-Ukraine market have even grown by 20%, which is I think giving a very good growth rate. Coming to Americas, all in all static. The North American contraction that you see here with roughly -2%, partly owed still to the soft card winding down and cessation, and the already admittedly high smartphone and subscriber penetration is overcompensated by the very high South America volume. And one problem child is Brazil, the economic and regulatory situation there, and the oil situation there is definitely still being a break to the demand that could be there. But overall, America is a very reliable, stable market. So having a static 780 million units year over year. Next slide, please. Europe. Europe is also very high level. You see 420 million units have been shipped by Similines members. And in these markets, I think that the degree and the footprint of Similines members is even higher. So I would say that the 90% might even be too low in Europe, because you know that one of the leading shipments of leading vendors are coming from Europe. A lot of Similines members have their base there, and I would think that the 420 million are making up for even more than 90% of the market share there. Little cessation, a little contraction due to the fact that we see very many operators consolidate their buying behavior, many operators even going into merge with others, which has always, especially in the time when the buying centers are combined, certain reduction impact to numbers. And then after all, we shouldn't be over ambitious if we see how big the smartphone penetration is, how much high-end phones are already in the market. The level, I think, is extremely positive. Middle East, Africa, definitely a very challenging market. You all know about the political and the economic challenges that some of the countries have. And Middle East, I think, is doing excellent. And some of the regions are having issues, and that conflicts a little bit and masks a little bit the great performance that Middle East itself is having. So it might not be 100% accurate if you say Middle East has -7 and all the other regions are doing the same. It's a fairly heterogeneous situation there. But 950 million units are still a very big number, and I think we have a very positive momentum there to be expected as soon as things are calming down there. Africa, so nothing to too special to be reported there. Same like in Brazil, there's a certain oil impact definitely seen there. So this is breaking demand a little bit, but otherwise this is also doing fairly okay. Next slide, please. So with this, we conclude the regional perspective and come to the generic form factor slide. And some of you might know the left part information because we used this last year. The split between the plug-in, the micro and the nano SIM. And let me just, for the avoidance of doubt, say that we talk in terms of plug-in SIM, even if a micro SIM and nano SIM are also pluggable SIMs for the 2FF. And you see that in 2015, 30% have been still 2FF form factor, 44, which was a leading form factor, have been micro, and the nano SIM has made up for 26%. There was no explicit triple SIM reported, and the agreement was to have the triple SIM included into the nano SIM. And now you see a fairly, I would say, unique development into 2016 if you compare what happened to the numbers in 2016. The form factor that, by the way, didn't make up for the majority of the nano SIM numbers in 2015 has now gained 60% of the overall volume on a global scale, which is, I think, a fairly unique development from one year to the next. And that's definitely an extreme success story of the triple SIM, which is combining nano, micro, and plug-in SIM, or 2FF, 3FF, and 4FF, or what how it's also called. And that's really an extreme success story. The largest triple SIM markets have been India, Pacific Asia, and Western Europe. One of the reasons that, for example, US is not there is that many device manufacturers do SIM insertion in Chinese factories, and that is one of the reasons why the triple is not referred to as a US product here. But I think all in all, this shows really that even something like a SIM card is something that if you can apply value to your customers, you will have an extreme success. And after 30 years of SIM card, there's still huge potential of innovation, especially also not only on the form factor side, but also in the product itself. Two reasons for triple SIM being this successful is one, it's definitely convenient for customers. So you don't have to order the right format, and it's massively efficient for the MNOs. So they serve and save a lot of money in the logistical supply chain. They serve a lot of working capital. They save a lot of scrap rates, etc. So it's massively efficient for the MNOs, and that's one of the reasons why the product has, after its introduction in 2013-14, succeeded so fast. Next slide, please. NFC definitely on a global scale in an extremely good shape. So you see NFC applications and use cases all around. The negative part is definitely that the UICC based NFC services are not having the momentum and showing the momentum that we hope for yet. There are reasons like when you look to the lower part here on the slide with the NFC volumes, the drivers for this, the global trend for UICC and UICC based NFC service is not that massive. So you see some alternatives here coming up, and you see in the US, which has been a very important market in the last 2-3 years, that cessation of soft card also still had left its traces in 2016. And there are still markets that have good traction, good momentum, and they have an extremely well-working use case scenarios. That is mainly here to be mentioned with growth rates in CIS and in some countries in Europe. Next slide, please. Talking about LTE, which is definitely one of the engines of the numbers that we are currently seeing. You see that 1.4 billion units, which is a growth of close to 40%, have been shipped in 2016. Greater China is making up for this already mentioned 400 million pieces. India is second with 314, and then South America and North America are next. So you see that this is an extremely dynamic market, and we expect this still to be continuing for quite some time. Next. Thanks. M2M, I think also very often discussed and mentioned, also having a very strong momentum. So we were able to repeat the growth that has been already reached an extremely big value in 2015 with 48%. We have now done 49%. And we are very satisfied with this one. Important here is we are here referring to the M2M MFF2 shipments, which means we are just really referring to the soldered M2Ms, which is not the full story and not the true story, because M2M is going much further. As soon as you put a pluggable SIM into a TomTom, as soon as you put a pluggable SIM into a watch, it's certainly definitely an M2M use case, and it's also one of the reasons why we are not talking about the absolute numbers here, because it wouldn't reflect the whole M2M story. I even would say that there are multiplicators that are between 2 to 5, depending on the countries, where the M2M cases are higher than what you see in the MFF2. Next slide, please. And there we come to the conclusion. I think we have seen a lot of different aspects of SIM shipments, of UICC, UICC shipments. We've talked about the 5% increase in SIM alliance shipments in total, owed to increasing complexity, required Java cards and LTE cards, compared to a 3% increase in total available market. That was this 5.45 billion pieces all in all. And this is really an extremely high number, and also represents the all-time high for SIM alliance. We see a definitely steep increase and raise of connectivity, and if you read newspaper, if you see what kind of ideas are coming up and what kind of values can also be generated by connecting things, you know that the biggest part is still to come, I would say. And the SIM industry, together with the MNOs, is definitely an unparalleled team to be able to, on a short-term basis and for the next years, provide the security on a global scale that might be really required to defend the vulnerability of our society. So I'm very positive on this topic. Asia is our growth champion. Indonesia is doing well, India is doing excellent, back to normal, and I think China is also stable with potential to come back to the old strength. So we are very positive on this too. And if we jump to the next page, thanks. With the rapid emergence of the triple SIM card, I think that's a good testimonial how a product like a SIM card that has accompanied the industry now for some decades can still be improved in a way that it's changing the world somehow. So we have seen that 60% of triple SIMs are now shipped compared to the overall volume, which is, I think, really showing that SIM industry is anticipating excellently the needs not only of the end consumers but also of the MNOs. Ongoing migration to LTE 4G is definitely one of the drivers of the volumes for 2016, and we see still some strong momentum during this year. M2M, just the biggest thing still to come. We see a lot of interesting discussions. We see a lot of interesting use cases. If in Barcelona or if in special special events, you see that there's a lot of excellent topics that might come up and might need the support of an industry that is taking care about security. And after all, that's exactly the plan, that the SIM Alliance members feel themselves responsible to continue to drive the comprehensive security story also for all use cases that might be coming up in future. And that's the overview I wanted to give you in this quick webinar. I hope you found it interesting, and thanks very much from my side.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Stefan. Well, that brings our 2016 SIM Shipments webinar to a close. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us today. If you do have any questions related to the content of the presentation you've just seen, then please feel free to address them to SIM Alliance using the contact details that you can see on the slide here. Many thanks and goodbye.